The apple in her hand no longer felt heavy with memory. It felt light with possibility. But changing a mindset that had crystallized over years of disappointment wouldn't happen overnight. Could she really trust that the path forward was as simple as the man had suggested? As Dorothy stood contemplating this question, her phone buzzed with a text message. She fumbled for her reading glasses, expecting another check-in from Sarah or perhaps a pharmacy reminder about prescription refills. Instead, the message was from an unknown number with a familiar area code. The small town where she'd grown up, 3 states away. Mrs. Patterson? This is Lucy Chun from Maplewood Elementary. I got your number from the alumni directory. I hope you remember me. I was Lucy Martinez back then, in your daughter Sarah's class. I'm the principal here now, and I have something important to ask you. Dorothy's heart skipped. Lucy Martinez. She remembered her clearly. A bright, determined little girl whose family had struggled financially, whose parents spoke limited English. Dorothy had spent countless hours helping Lucy with homework, driving her to after-school programs, even buying her school supplies when needed. It was during Dorothy's volunteer days, back when she'd had energy for everyone else's children along with her own. The phone rang before she could finish reading the text. Dorothy answered with trembling fingers. Mrs. Patterson? Oh, I'm so glad you picked up. Lucy's voice carried the warmth of genuine affection mixed with professional urgency. I know this is out of the blue, but I need your help. We have a crisis here that's breaking my heart, and you're the only person I could think of who might understand what these families are going through. Lucy explained that Maplewood Elementary was facing budget cuts that would eliminate their family support program, the very program Dorothy had helped create 30 years ago. Dozens of children from struggling families would lose access to tutoring, meals, and the kind of wraparound support that had once made such a difference in Lucy's own life. The district says we need to prove the program's value with data and documentation. But Mrs. Patterson, you and I both know that some things can't be measured in spreadsheets. These kids need what you gave me. Someone who sees their potential instead of their problems. I've been fighting this battle alone, but I remembered something you used to say. When you're fighting for children, you never really fight alone. Dorothy felt something stirring in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years. The familiar fire of righteous anger mixed with protective instinct. This was the feeling that had driven her through decades of advocacy work, the passion that had made her fearless in the face of bureaucracy and indifference. Lucy, Dorothy started, then stopped. Could she really do this? Could she dive back into the world of meetings and policy battles and emotional investment when she'd barely been managing her own daily routine? I know it's a lot to ask, Lucy continued, sensing her hesitation. But I've been following your career from afar. Even after you retired, people still talk about the Dorothy Patterson approach to family advocacy. We need that experience, that wisdom. These children need a champion who understands that fighting for families isn't just a job, it's a calling. Dorothy looked down at the apple still clutched in her hand, then around at the abundance of the produce section. Here was rediscovery after 60 staring her in the face. Not just in the form of nutritious foods that might restore her physical vitality, but in the shape of a purpose that could reignite her soul. New beginnings weren't always about starting something entirely different. Sometimes they meant returning to who you'd always been at your core. But accepting Lucy's challenge would mean more than just getting involved again. It would mean believing she still had something valuable to offer the world. Dorothy closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle around her like a familiar coat. When she opened them again, her gaze fell on the elderly gentleman from earlier, now at the checkout counter. He caught her eye and smiled, giving her a small nod as if he somehow knew she was standing at life's turning point after 60. Lucy, Dorothy said, her voice steadier than it had been in months, tell me exactly what you need. As Lucy outlined the situation, Dorothy found herself mentally organizing strategies, identifying key stakeholders, and mapping out potential solutions. Her mind, which had felt foggy and slow for so long, suddenly clicked into sharp focus. She wasn't just listening to a problem. She was already 3 steps ahead, seeing pathways that Lucy, in her frustration and exhaustion, might have missed. But then Lucy said something that stopped Dorothy cold. Mrs. Patterson, I have to be honest. Part of the reason I called you is because I'm pregnant with my first child, and I keep thinking about what kind of world I'm bringing her into. I want her to have the same chance you gave me, to have someone believe in her potential even when circumstances look impossible. The words hit Dorothy like a gentle thunderbolt. Here was Lucy, now a successful educator and expectant mother, directly crediting Dorothy's long-ago kindness for helping shape her life's trajectory. All those years Dorothy had spent doubting her relevance, questioning whether her work had mattered, wondering if she'd made any real difference. And here was living proof that love and support could echo across decades. Dorothy felt something crack open in her chest, not with pain, but with a profound sense of emotional closure. She'd been grieving not just Robert's death, but the death of her own significance. She'd allowed society's dismissive attitude toward aging to convince her that her best contributions were behind her. But wisdom with age meant understanding that influence doesn't end with retirement. It transforms and deepens. "Lucy," Dorothy said, her voice thick with emotion, "you just gave me something I didn't even know I needed. You reminded me that the seeds we plant don't always bloom in our sight, but that doesn't mean they don't take root." Standing in that grocery store, surrounded by the abundance of fresh produce, Dorothy experienced a moment of perfect clarity. The elderly gentleman's advice about fruit wasn't just about nutrition. It was about nourishment in its fullest sense. Just as those 5 fruits could feed her body and restore her physical vitality, this opportunity to help Lucy could feed her soul and restore her sense of purpose. She thought about Robert, and for the first time in 3 years, the memory brought warmth instead of pain. He would have been so proud to see her stepping back into the arena, fighting for children again. She thought about her own children, who worried about her decline, and realized they needed to see their mother as a force for good rather than someone to be managed and protected. "I'll do it," Dorothy said firmly. "But Lucy, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same woman I was 30 years ago. I'm slower, I get tired more easily, and I'll need to approach this differently than I used to. But what I lack in energy, I make up for in perspective. Sometimes the best weapon against a system that dismisses people is someone they've already written off." Lucy's sob of relief was audible through the phone. "Mrs. Patterson, you have no idea what this means to me, to these families." But Dorothy didn't know. She understood exactly what it meant, because she just remembered what it felt like to be needed, not despite her age, but because of everything her years had taught her. The apple in her hand suddenly felt like the most important fruit she'd ever held. 3 weeks later, Dorothy stood in front of her bathroom mirror, but this time she wasn't cataloging losses. Her hair was pulled back in the same practical style she'd worn during her working years, and her eyes held a spark that had been missing for far too long. Today was the day she'd drive to Maplewood for her first strategy meeting with Lucy and the school board. The journey back to purpose hadn't been without its challenges. Dorothy had to acknowledge that her body truly had changed. She tired more easily, needed more sleep, and couldn't push through exhaustion the way she once had. But she'd also discovered something remarkable. Senior resilience wasn't about denying these changes, but about working with them intelligently. Those 5 fruits the elderly gentleman had mentioned. She'd researched them thoroughly and incorporated them into her daily routine. The difference was subtle but real. Her energy felt more sustained, her mind clearer, her overall sense of well-being improved. But more importantly, taking care of her physical health had become an act of self-respect rather than a chore. She was preparing her body for the work ahead, not just managing decline. The phone calls with Lucy had multiplied into a small network of support. Other former colleagues had emerged from their own quiet retirements when they heard about the campaign. Dorothy realized she wasn't the only one who had been feeling sidelined and forgotten. There was a whole community of experienced advocates who'd been waiting for the right cause to pull them back into meaningful engagement. Sarah had been initially worried about her mother taking on such a demanding project, but during their last conversation, Dorothy heard something new in her daughter's voice: pride. "Mom, you sound like yourself again," Sarah had said. "I'd forgotten how formidable you could be when you believed in something." Dorothy smiled. remembering how she'd once worried about being a burden to her children. Now she understood that the greatest gift she could give them was to remain fully herself, not a diminished version waiting for decline, but a woman who continued to grow and contribute right up until the end. The morning of her departure, Dorothy packed her small suitcase with the same care she'd once used for business trips. She included a small bag of mixed fruits, her new allies in maintaining the energy she'd need for the battles ahead. As she loaded her car, her neighbor Mrs. Chan waved from across the street. "You look wonderful, Dorothy, like you're going somewhere important." "I am," Dorothy replied, and meant it completely. The drive to Maplewood felt different from any journey she'd taken in years. This wasn't about visiting the past or running from the present. It was about building a bridge between who she'd been and who she was becoming. Life's quiet victories weren't always dramatic. Sometimes they were as simple as choosing growth over surrender, engagement over isolation, purpose over emptiness. As she pulled into the school parking lot, Dorothy caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at her was older, yes, but she was also something more valuable. She was seasoned. All those years of experience, all that accumulated wisdom, all the timeless lessons learned through decades of loving and losing and getting back up again. They weren't obsolete. They were exactly what the world needed. Dorothy stepped out of her car and walked toward the school entrance, her steps confident and purposeful. She was 73 years old, and she was just getting started. The apple in her purse felt like a promise to herself, to Lucy, to all the children who needed someone to believe in their potential. Some stories don't end with the sunset. Sometimes they begin there, in the golden light of wisdom finally recognized and courage finally claimed. Number 5 best fruits seniors must eat daily to boost longevity and stay healthy after 60. At 73, Dorothy had always believed that her best years were behind her. The mirror showed wrinkles where smooth skin once was. Her joints creaked like old floorboards, and her energy seemed to drain faster than water through a sieve. She'd accepted this as the natural order of things, until one ordinary Tuesday morning changed everything she thought she knew about aging. It started with a simple trip to the grocery store. Dorothy shuffled through the automatic doors, her usual routine of grabbing processed foods and heading straight to the pharmacy section for her growing collection of supplements. But something made her pause at the produce section. Maybe it was the vibrant colors calling out to her, or perhaps the memory of her grandmother's garden that suddenly flooded back. The same grandmother who lived independently until 96, tending to her plants with hands that never seemed to age. That's when she noticed him, an elderly gentleman, probably in his 80s, moving through the fruit aisles with the energy of someone half his age. His skin had a healthy glow, his step was confident, and there was something about his presence that radiated vitality. He carefully selected specific fruits, examining each one with the knowledge of someone who understood their true value. Dorothy found herself watching, curious about this man who seemed to have unlocked some secret to life after 60 that she'd never discovered. When he caught her looking, instead of feeling embarrassed, she felt drawn to ask the question that had been forming in her mind. "Excuse me, but you seem so vibrant. What's your secret?" The man smiled, his eyes twinkling with the kind of emotional wisdom that only comes from decades of living. "It's not really a secret," he said, gesturing toward his carefully chosen selection of fruits. "It's just that most people don't realize the power sitting right here in plain sight. These aren't just snacks, they're medicine, energy, and hope all wrapped up in nature's perfect packages." He went on to explain how 5 specific fruits had transformed not just his physical health, but his entire approach to senior empowerment. How they'd given him the strength to maintain his independent living, the mental clarity to pursue new hobbies, and the emotional resilience to face each day with genuine excitement rather than resignation. Dorothy listened, captivated, as he described how these simple fruits had helped him avoid the common pitfalls that steal joy from so many people's golden years. No expensive treatments, no complicated routines, just the wisdom of choosing the right foods that work with your body instead of against it. As she stood there among the colorful displays of nature's bounty, Dorothy realized she was at a crossroads. She could continue down the path of accepting decline as inevitable, or she could embrace this new possibility, that perhaps her most vibrant years weren't behind her after all. The gentleman finished his shopping and began to walk away, but not before leaving Dorothy with words that would echo in her mind for days. The choice is always yours. These fruits won't just add years to your life, they'll add life to your years. But only if you're ready to believe that transformation is possible at any age. Standing alone in that produce section, Dorothy felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. But would she have the courage to take that first step toward reclaiming her vitality? The answer to that question, and the 5 life-changing fruits that could revolutionize your health after 60, might surprise you. Hashtag part 2, the weight of years. Dorothy's hands trembled slightly as she picked up a single apple, its red skin catching the fluorescent lights above. The tremor wasn't from age, it was from memory. She remembered the apple orchards where she and her late husband Robert had spent their early retirement years, dreaming of adventures they'd never gotten the chance to take. Life after retirement hadn't unfolded the way they planned. Robert's diagnosis came just 2 years after his retirement party, and instead of traveling the world, Dorothy found herself navigating hospital corridors and insurance forms. The next 8 years became a blur of caregiving, doctor's appointments, and watching the man she'd loved for 43 years slowly fade away. When Robert passed 3 years ago, Dorothy expected to feel relief. Instead, she felt lost. The woman who had once managed a busy household, raised 2 successful children, and built a career in social work suddenly couldn't find a reason to get out of bed. Her children, now adults with their own busy lives, called dutifully but lived states away. The house felt too big, too quiet, too full of echoes from a life that no longer existed. Senior reflection had become her unwelcome companion during those long, empty days. She'd sit in Robert's old chair, wondering where the confident woman had gone. The one who used to counsel families through their darkest moments, who found solutions when others saw only problems. That woman seemed like a stranger now, buried under layers of grief and the slow surrender that comes when you stop believing in your own capacity for joy. The doctor visits had multiplied. Blood pressure medication, cholesterol pills, supplements for bone density, vitamins for energy, she no longer felt. Her medicine cabinet looked like a small pharmacy, each bottle a reminder of her body's betrayal. Her daughter Sarah would call and ask about her health, and Dorothy would recite the list of ailments like a grocery list. Arthritis in her knees, trouble sleeping, digestive issues that made eating feel like a chore rather than a pleasure. Finding purpose seemed impossible when every day felt like a struggle just to maintain the basics. The volunteer work at the community center had stopped when her energy flagged. The book club disbanded when too many members moved to assisted living. Even her beloved garden, once her sanctuary, had become overgrown because bending and kneeling had become too painful. But standing in that produce section, something stirred in Dorothy that she'd thought was gone forever. The elderly gentleman's words echoed in her mind, but it was more than his advice about fruit. It was the way he'd looked at her, not with pity or the patronizing kindness she'd grown accustomed to, but with recognition, as if he saw the woman she used to be, the woman she might still become. Dorothy thought about her grandmother again, the one who had lived to 96 with such grace. Grandma Rose had never talked about decline or limitation. She'd spoken about seasons, how life moved in cycles, and how each season brought its own gifts if you knew how to recognize them. Emotional resilience, she used to say, isn't about avoiding the storms, Dorothy. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Maybe this was her storm season. Maybe she'd been so focused on what she'd lost that she'd forgotten to look for what might still be possible. The apple in her hand felt heavier now, weighted with possibility rather than memory. But could she really believe that change was possible at this stage of her life? And if those 5 fruits held the key to transformation, was she brave enough to turn it? Hashtag part 3, echoes of what was. The grocery store's background music shifted to an old jazz standard, and Dorothy's breath caught. It was the song that had played at her and Robert's wedding reception. the one they danced to in their tiny first apartment kitchen on Sunday mornings. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering how fearless she'd been then, how certain that life would unfold exactly as they'd planned. At 28, Dorothy had been the kind of woman who tackled challenges head-on. When their first child arrived with complications, she'd researched every specialist, fought insurance companies, and became an expert advocate. When Robert's small business struggled during the recession, she'd gone back to school at 42, earning her social work degree while managing a household and supporting her family. She'd been a force of nature, someone others turned to in crisis. Those memories felt like looking at photographs of someone else's life. Where had that woman gone? The one who used to wake up energized, who saw problems as puzzles to solve rather than walls to hit. Dorothy realized she'd been grieving more than just Robert. She'd been mourning the loss of herself. The transition to life after retirement had been jarring even before Robert's illness. After 30 years of helping families navigate their most difficult moments, suddenly having no schedule, no one depending on her expertise, had left her feeling invisible. The gold watch and the farewell party had felt more like a funeral than a celebration. Society seemed to whisper that her productive years were over, that she should be content to fade quietly into the background. During Robert's illness, at least she'd had purpose again. Caregiving had been exhausting and heartbreaking, but it had also felt meaningful. She'd been needed. Now, in the aftermath, she faced a question that haunted many people in their golden years. What do you do when the roles that defined you disappear? Her children meant well, but their concern had become another weight to carry. They wanted her to move to a retirement community, to be around people her own age. They spoke about her in hushed tones when they thought she couldn't hear, using phrases like quality of life and safety concerns. Their love felt like a gentle prison, wrapping her in bubble wrap when what she craved was the sharp edge of genuine challenge. Dorothy's senior reflection had become a daily ritual of cataloging losses, her energy, her confidence, her sense of relevance. She'd started seeing herself through the world's eyes, fragile, declining, someone to be handled with care rather than respected for her wisdom. The mirror had become an enemy, showing her a stranger who looked tired and defeated. But standing in this produce section, something was shifting. The encounter with the vibrant elderly gentleman had cracked something open inside her. She thought about the light in his eyes, the way he'd moved with intention rather than hesitation. He'd spoken about those 5 fruits not as medicine for the sick, but as fuel for the living. Dorothy realized she'd been approaching her health like she was managing decline rather than nurturing potential. Every pill, every doctor's visit, every careful movement had been about preventing loss rather than creating gain. What if she'd been asking the wrong questions all along? Instead of, how do I manage getting older? Maybe the question was, how do I keep growing? The apple in her hand no longer felt heavy with memory. It felt light with possibility. But changing a mindset that had crystallized over years of disappointment wouldn't happen overnight. Could she really trust that the path forward was as simple as the man had suggested?